scale of the protests that we have seen there. What do you make of it over this controversial extradition law?
I think it's extraordinary. And if you're looking at how the responses are, when you look at those who've been arrested over it, whether it be releases, and you can see that the legislation which in a way triggered all this is now being rowed back on. But I think there are serious questions about the long-term and short-term effects of those who've been caught up in these protests.
What do you make of the scale of the protest? We'll be showing our viewers the pictures there, and the strength of feeling over this extradition law and actually the success they've had in putting pressure on Carrie Lam.
Yeah, I think that for me, you'll understand that if I feel quite emotional about what's happening, and if I contrast what's happening there, where people are so serious about the fundamental things in life with the slightly delusional drivel which politics in this country has come down to. So I feel very strongly about it, and I wish that the British political caste was rather more serious about how we deal with it, both by hauling the Chinese ambassador in to complain about the fact that he said the joint declaration doesn't apply anymore, also by making it clear that we think that the government in Hong Kong should withdraw, not just suspend the extradition agreement, by pressing for a public inquiry into the way that police have handled the demonstrations. And I hope that the Prime Minister, in one of her last acts as Prime Minister, when she goes to the G20, will complain explicitly to President Xi Jinping about what's been happening.
Right, so you obviously don't think the government has taken a tough enough line. There is a Chinese delegation here on trade at the moment. I mean, how tough do you think Philip Hammond should be? Should he use it as an opportunity to talk about this?
The former Australian Prime Minister, whom I didn't always agree with about issues like climate change, Tony Abbott, once asked what the attitude of the world was to China, said it was driven by fear and greed. And I think there's been an element of that, more than an element of that, in the way that we've dealt with Chinese delegations, not just the last one. The truth is that the Chinese do business by and large on the same basis as everybody else. They get what they want at the best price. They invest in the things they most want, and at the margins, politics is allowed to play in. But if you allow people to bully you, they go on bullying you.
I mean, when you look at what is happening now, and you've said yourself about the declaration, the joint declaration, do you think the one country, two systems principle is now in serious jeopardy?
I do, particularly if this law goes through, because what it does is to remove the firewall between the rule of law in Hong Kong and what passes for the law in China, which you can see operating in Xinjiang, for example. There was a wonderful broadcast by the BBC correspondent about what's happening in Xinjiang this morning on the Today programme. So I do think that is pretty fundamental. One country, two systems worked pretty well for about 10 years after 1997. Not perfect. Some things were, democracy was throttled back a bit. But by and large, it worked pretty well. It's gone really bad since the demonstrations in 2014, which I think spooked China and made them much tougher on Hong Kong.
Let's talk about the TV